Beneath this simple black and white exterior lies a rich tapestry of sound.
Well, that's about the only piece of piano I can actually play. But the idea behind that is that we have a tendency as human beings to see things in black and white, to see things very simply. And this tendency is exaggerated by the internet, which is making often complicated, complex things artificially simple. And one of the concerns that I have, and that when I say I also mean the group with whom I work, that we have, is that we're facing global problems as a society, and yet there's many forces which are trying to make our understanding of these problems oversimplistic. So the idea of Let's Talk About It is to provide a platform of information through discussions with experts in different fields who provide their own angle and understanding on topics surrounding sustainability, on innovation, on transitions to circular economies, on resource management, and other similar global challenges that we're facing. And the idea is that through watching these programs, that all of us can then be better informed and generate our own opinions on what we can see and what we can see on these videos. Really, it's a quest for trying to find some truth in all the information that's available. And today, we've got a special discussion, a roundtable. This is definitely designed to be informal. So there'll be opportunity as well for you all to participate and ask questions. Ideally, these things usually take a bit of time for us all to get, relaxed and get all our words together and feel in the right frame of mind to ask questions. But ideally, after an hour or so, it'd be great if we're just in one sort of conversation, one discussion, as if we were at a restaurant together or something similar. So that's the goal. Now, today we're going to be talking about plastics. We're going to be focusing on plastics and whether plastics belong to a responsible future. Now, the reason that we've chosen this topic is because plastics are very much in the public eye. They very much feature on social media, and in traditional media, and it's identified as a global problem for which, maybe at first glance one might even think that there is no solution to. That's something we wanted to investigate as a team behind Let's Talk About It, to try and come to some idea of what is really happening, what can really be done, who's doing what. And on either side of me, I have two gentlemen on either side who are very much playing roles in working out what to do with plastics and plastic wastes. So if I maybe start on my right-hand side here, we have Aleš Blaha. And Aleš, we met you can watch our interview we had together on Let's Talk About It. Indeed, all our visitors here have been on Let's Talk About It programs, which you can see on YouTube. But Aleš Blaha is a member of the Prague Services Board of Directors. So he's on the upper board people who are working out how to manage our waste here in Prague most effectively. And in particular, he's the director of, and he's leading the reconstruction of the waste-to-energy incineration plant at Malešovice. So Aleš is coming from, of course, a technical background, and is doing that important role of working out how to receive back or retain the energy which are in various plastic compounds back into the grid so we can reuse it and put it back into the cycle. Then directly on my right is Jiří Koutek, who is the director of the Institute of Macromolecular Chemistry from the Academy of Sciences. So macromolecules, that just means huge big molecules, of which included under that big framework are, of course, polymers, plastics. And Jiří indeed himself is involved in, he's got at least one project, I think, looking at the recycling of plastics, which we'll get to, but is also, at the moment, he's the chairman of the European Plastics Federation. So Jiří's also got not just a national perspective, but a European-wide perspective. Then here on my direct left is Wojciech Fozetski. And,
good afternoon, everyone.
And he's the co-founder of INCIEN, which is the Institute of Circular Economy, or Transition to the Circular Economy. The director name now eludes me, but now you've taken a sort of bigger remit, but you remain your concentration on your expertise on transitions into the circular economy. And so we've had two discussions indeed, looking at focusing mainly on Prague, but also with some overlays into other European countries. So Wojciech has got a really strong and diverse background, understanding how we can transition our economy to a circular economy, and of course that's very relevant to what we want to talk about in terms of plastics and whether plastics can play that responsible role in future. Last but not least, a gentleman to my far left is Robert Suchopa.
Good afternoon.
And he's working at Unipetrol's research and education facilities. And he's also involved in a large project which is looking to use plasma-based pyrolysis of plastic wastes.
Not really plasma-based, but pyrolysis in general.
Okay, excuse me. So pyrolysis in general of plastic wastes, and to regenerate some of the starting compounds, some of the starting hydrocarbons, which then could go back into the loop, back into the cycle. Robert has really a lot to offer in terms of that technical background, the understanding of what plastics are, how they behave, and how we can use chemistry and physics to regenerate the starting materials for them. So that's my round table, or almost linear table. We're not quite circular yet. Maybe we can. It's beginning to concave a bit. And of guests. Unfortunately, two of our guests who were planned to be here in the end could not be here, but I'm sure they're with us in spirit, and will be following us maybe online. So I hope that they're okay and well, and I'd like to say a quick hello to them. Maybe just a point, technical points here, that you're welcome to all send questions. Of course, you here can raise your hand after the hour, we can get a discussion going, but anybody at home as well can send to slido.com questions on our debate, our discussion. And indeed, those who do write in with questions, if I'm not mistaken, will receive a Let's Talk About It t-shirt. Is that correct, Josephine? I'm just checking here with the young lady here in the front row, Josefina, who I'm not sure how many of you do know. Perhaps a lot of you do here. Josefina is very much the brains behind the Let's Talk About It project, and tirelessly finds guests, contacts them, gets it all together, and makes it happen. So I think maybe a round of applause to Josie at the beginning for her work in making this happen. despite the fact that we're in rather remarkable surrounds here, behind us, just to make the gentleman feel at home, you probably recognize the picture, right? Because this is a picture of the cafe that all the Let's Talk About It talks and discussions take place. So that's the reason why we're surrounded by this sort of rather nice picture. Okay, so I think that's all the technical issues. I myself, of course, am the interviewer of all these programs. I'm also associated with Unipetrol as a brand ambassador. I'm interested, generally speaking, as a chemist, in the way our planet can capture and store light energy in chemical forms, and that crosses over very much into the hydrocarbons and what we can do with them, whether that be for energy or the later, the petrochemical uses in plastics, polymers, pharmaceuticals, or whatever it might be. All these chemical things get me excited, as I am indeed a chemist. And so for the last 2 years, we've been working with Let's Talk About It as a project. I think there's lots of really great stuff on our website. If you go to YouTube, you can look it all up. So, but let's kick off with our discussion here today. So maybe, Wojciech, if I can begin with you, and you can provide maybe a sort of a wider perspective on why people generally are rather worried about plastics going forward into the future.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction, for the invitation, and it's great to see everyone over here. And to answer your question, I think we don't have to look that much far, right? You go out on the street and you see some of the single-use plastic packaging lying in our open nature, some of it being accumulated in our oceans, in our open environments, and that is causing definitely a lot of harm. And of course, there's this whole carbon footprint related to our goal to reduce the total emissions that we produce as humanity, and plastics play a big role in that. So I think it's a reason to be concerned, and a serious one, but at the same time, there's a lot that can be done about it from a circular point of view, from a design perspective, from a producer's perspective. So I don't think it's a dead end. I think there's a lot we can do, but I think we could say that we are, in fact, in a crisis that needs to be solved.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, gentlemen, but when thinking about plastics, I think the core reason for fear about plastics is that they're synthetic. And I think that people generally, I don't know if you agree, that people generally have a predisposition to be a bit slightly skeptical about things that are synthesized, that are made by human beings. If you look at the material ages, we often describe the development of mankind in terms of ages, the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and then you get to the Polymer Age. And the polymer is the first of those. I mean, when you start off the stone, that's when we could just pick up a stone and use the stone. And then with a bit of intelligence, you realize you can extract things from stone and you can form metals. And then with a bit more intelligence and chemistry, you can mix metals to form alloys which have different properties. And then we've come to the age where finally we're almost able to assemble molecules into long macromolecules and chains, which have all these properties which we can almost determine at will. And that sort of climax of human intelligence and sophistication is greeted, I think, by many people with suspicion. Do you think would that be fairly accurate in your opinion, Jiří? Do you think is that a root cause of worry and fear about plastics?
Well, I'm sure that we don't have, in majority of applications, we don't have any better alternative. But what we have to change is our behavior. In fact, almost 40% of plastic production is used as packaging materials. And that's the problem that, as Wojciech already said, that we see the plastic packaging almost everywhere. So we have to change our behavior. That's
okay. Change behavior, but just to maybe to dwell a short while on this first point of understanding what are the concerns about plastics. So I think with education and with knowledge about the actual chemistry of polymers and plastics, that we could go some way to helping people have less fear about them. Robert, what do you think? I mean, you understand a lot about the chemistry of polymers and plastics. Do you also find that many people think of it as a sort of a Frankenstein, synthetic, man-made monster rather than being just rather sophisticated chemicals?
Well, I guess the general feeling might be described as it's not natural, right? If you throw away plastic and it stays there for hundreds of years, that's not a natural thing to do for material, how to behave. If you throw away a food scrap, it will disintegrate eventually. It will take some time, but it will happen. But with plastic, nothing like this is going to happen. Therefore, it might feel unnatural. Or the mechanical properties. Using plastics, we can achieve mechanical properties of other material, or in the realm where the other materials could not perform or could not deliver. This is one of the reasons why we rely on plastics so much, to my opinion. So again, something that is not natural, right? This is, well, why didn't you consider using metal for this application? Well, because plastic does better. Okay, so this is, I would say that maybe some kind of feel for what is natural and what is not is maybe one of the, let's say, motivators of that fear, or maybe one of the groundwork for where the fear is coming from in the societal level. So
that's an interesting point. We've got maybe rational and irrational fear. So I think maybe some of the fear I was talking about is an irrational-based fear, maybe on just they're not too sure about what they are, what chemistry really. So then that's an irrational-based fear. But certainly it's a rational-based fear when you hear that you've got a material that, when discarded, will hang around for hundreds, thousands of years. So that gives us, I think, a rational concern, doesn't it? Well, and then you mentioned, well, people then might say, well, okay, so why not use a different material?
Yep.
So, I don't know, why not use a different material, gentlemen? What do plastics offer us that other materials just do not? Anybody like to answer that?
I think it is the weight. It is not so heavy, you know. And this, I will be a little bit philosophical. The materials which came in the Iron Age or Bronze Age, they last over. They are still here. But they have been replaced by other materials. Let me say plastics. And the same will happen with plastics. We will live with plastics to the end of our life, of course. But the point is to minimize the amount of it and to make it easier, to make only some sorts of plastic which can be recycled much better. Today, a lot of waste companies are asking us to take the residue after the plastic recycling, because only 20 to 30% of plastic collected in the yellow bins can be reused, can be used again as material. 70%, maybe 80%, it depends, 80% will be incinerated or landfilled. Yes, and so as I see us, so Jiří is at the birth of the material, Wojciech is the assistant at the lifetime, and we both are at the end, at the funeral of the plastic, you know. So, of course, we can incinerate, it is better than landfill, but it is not the best way. The best way would be minimize the amount because we can live without plastic. You could see it now during the epidemic. But we can replace plastic by paper, by something else, you know, or by glass and reuse, and not so take and use plastic so easy as we do. This is the problem, what I mean.
So you think there's an overuse already of
Overuse,
plastic?
yeah.
And would you agree with that, Jiri?
Yeah, of course.
So can we identify what plastic uses can be substituted by other materials?
Well, I think they can be substituted, but at the expense of also of the nature. As it has been shown that now I'm speaking about packaging. If the plastics be replaced by other conventional materials, glass, paper, and so on, so the weight would be 3.5 higher. The energy requirements will be higher as well, and it's also concerned with greenhouse gases emissions. So,
what do you think to that, Wojtek? If we replace, so that's the deal. If we decide to replace some of our plastics with other materials, then we pay for that through extra weight, extra production costs, leading to bigger carbon footprints.
Exactly. I think you made a point, and I didn't want to sound so alarmistic at the start of my speech, but you asked what are the environmental concerns, and those are the facts that we have. But I think at the same time, it's really great material that has enabled us to be and get where we are, and it has caused also many positive impacts on the economy and our lifestyles and so on. But what we're seeing today is that there is a overproduction, overconsumption of single-use and often non-recyclable plastic, especially post-consumer packaging. That's the problem. And maybe not even here, but especially if you go to Indonesia, China, you see they don't have these effective waste management systems as we do, where we're able to collect it, maybe have difficulties recycling, but sometimes it's the matter of price, not the technology. So what I'm trying to say is that I think we need to be careful with replacements of plastics, because often the solutions can be even worse. For example, bioplastics, I think I have strong concerns about, because who knows if they're really biodegradable or not, and so on. Does it make sense to put water in metal cans? Is it better from the environmental perspective? Probably not. So we need to get better at working with what we have. That material is going to stay with us, like Aleš said, but we cannot allow to lose control of it and let it disappear into the environment and don't degrade. So we need a circular economy from a business perspective, city perspective, household perspective, where we'll be able to use plastics in a more circular ways. Plastics can be made to be recycled or from recycled content. That's great for reducing our carbon footprint. They can be made to be refillable, reusable, and so on. And so these are the models that we need to explore. But as Aleš said, I think we need to get away really from this overproduction of the single-use items that are really not necessary. You go to a conference, not here, luckily, but some places, that place is filled with you know, the cups, the plastic spoons, and it just goes straight to the incineration plant or landfill, and that's really not the future. Okay, so, and are you all now in agreement with that perspective, gentlemen? So if I summarize that the plastic as a material per se has certain advantages which can't be reproduced by other materials, which are valuable to society and us. However, the main problem is overproduction, especially of single-use plastics. Is that a fair summary so far? Would you agree with that?
And I liked Wojciech's sentence that we have to learn to do better what we have. This is something that underlines it.
So far, then, we've established that this material does have a lot of value for us, inherent value. It is maybe at the moment overused in certain areas, but Wojciech is suggesting that we can use principles of the circular economy to manage this resource a lot more effectively. So let's move on to this management of resources. You briefly talked a bit about production. So maybe we can start there. Let's start at production and design. So does anybody like to comment about how their understanding of plastic production is and what is wrong with that or right with that and where it should go into the future? Usually, maybe you'd like to say something about production,
Okay.
maybe even from a European perspective.
That's right, and I do agree that the plastic packagings are sometimes overused. There are some unnecessary packing. On the other hand, we still more and more often buy goods via e-shops, and such products are packed at least twice.
Yep.
What I really dislike is the overuse of polyethylene stretch films. It's easy to work with, so there is no need to any extra effort to put several layers in few seconds. But I would like to go slightly back. So we are afraid of plastics or plastic waste today, namely because of littering, since we can see it everywhere. So I think the worst thing that is or aspect that is connected with plastics is the littering, and the second one is at the end of their life, it's landfilling. We have to look at plastic waste as it's from my point of view is source of feedstock or at least of energy.
Okay, so it's important then to maintain that once we finish the use of that plastic, once I've drunk my water from that plastic bottle, I have to have a mind, I have to be mindful of the value of that the value of those molecules is still there, and that its life cycle goes on, right? So let's talk a bit about that. So we've produced our plastic containers or whatever it might be. We've had the immediate part of the life cycle. In other words, my consumer use of that particular plastic. I put it into my, let's assume that I will not litter it and put it directly into the environment, but I put it as a good citizen into the yellow bin. It goes into the yellow bin. Then what happens to it? You briefly mentioned that something like 50% was going straight to landfill.
70%.
70%.
Maybe 80%.
Maybe
it depends.
80%.
It depends on the demand on materials on the market. For example, this is classical PET. This is typical, and you can reuse it for the production of sweatshirt. You need maybe 10 or 11 bottles, big bottles, for one sweatshirt, you know. So, and also for in the car production, for the inside parts, for the roof inside, for example, the car. But you can't do it endless. So if you recycle each material, it doesn't matter which one. So after some cycles, like at the paper, you come to the end and you can't use it anymore because the macromolecules are cracked by this process of regranulation and so on, and then you have to waste it out, either to the landfill or incinerate it or use it as a material for new fuel, you know, so
yeah, that's what, so if I provide a bit of structure for the audience here, so if you're imagining you're throwing away your plastics into plastic waste, into the yellow bins, then some of the high value, let's say these bottles are more easily recyclably dealt with directly. Others will be, unfortunately, up to 70% or 80% might be put into landfill. Maybe we can discuss why that is a bad idea on a whole to put it into landfill. Or it can be sent to Alesh, who can collect it and to incinerate it, so to combust it in controlled conditions to receive the energy back, because these molecules have all their energy still within them, so at least we get the energy back, which of course is a sort of a recycling of the original solar energy that was fixed by photosynthesis. Or there's other possibly newer techniques how to deal with plastic waste, such, for example, as pyrolysis, heating it up. We're going to be talking about that in more detail with Robert, and regenerating some of the starting materials, the feedstocks for plastics. So let's break that up. First of all, then, first thing, the big elephant in the room is landfill. And if I look at look at the figures about landfill, they vary considerably from country to country. So we've mentioned about what's happening here in the Czech Republic. If you take a country such as Greece, then it's almost 100% of everything goes into landfill. If you go to northern Scandinavian countries, maybe zero is going to landfill. Can you give me a bit of perspective, what you understand about landfill, and why do different countries pursue different policies?
Yeah, so the landfills are an easy fix. And landfills are technology a couple thousand years old, right? I mean, when we had waste in the cities, maybe in the Bronze Age, that waste was very, very, very little, because we were great at reusing, recycling everything. It was just a matter of life or death. But what was waste was just thrown away behind the city doors, and it stayed there and accumulated a little. Most of it disappeared because it was of organic origin. So landfills, in a nutshell, hasn't changed that much over the last few thousand years. We still put trash, piles of trash, mountains of trash. We dig it underground. We secure them, not perfectly, and and it stays there. And we leave it as a legacy to our future generations. This is how we work with resources, right? So landfills are obviously the worst solution we could come up, and we need to radically eliminate them. Why some countries are better than others, I think you could argue the same with electromobility, renewable energy. Some countries, especially maybe the Northern Europe or Western Europe, have been more progressive with their legislation than the countries here, and they had a big head start. Like Germany, already in the 90s were doing better than Czechs are doing today. It has to do with our history, with our culture. That's changing. Now we have EU that's setting targets that are jointly agreed across the member states, but always the Scandinavia is complaining, we're already doing this, and the Greeks are screaming, we need 10 more years to get to zero landfills. So it's going to get there, it's going to get unified, it's going to take time. It's also a business model of the waste management companies. Landfills are very cheap, so it's about the national governments, whether they tax them or not. That's going to change in Czech, but it has been done in Germany in the 90s already.
So that's going to change in the Czech Republic. They are going to tax landfill more.
Yeah, 4 times more in the next 10 years.
4 times more in the next 10 years. So that then provides Aleš and Robert with a lot more raw materials in terms of plastic waste coming towards your solutions. Before we come into what, to discuss a bit more what your solutions are, Jiří, can I ask you to explain to us why, in terms of the science of it, the chemistry of it and the rest of it, why is it a bad idea to leave plastic waste in landfill?
Right, because of its, as I already said, it's a source of feedstock or energy.
So it's simply an economical reason for you. It's because we're wasting the resource.
Could I make some small introduction about recycling?
Yes.
Also, okay, so basically we have two kinds of plastics, thermoplastics and thermosets. The thermoplastics, they are the majority of packaging materials are thermoplastics. They can be remelted at elevated temperatures. So, and on this ability is based the first kind of recycling, so-called mechanical or material recycling. The material is just remelted and pelletized, and the pellets are then reprocessed by conventional methods. It's the simplest way, however, there are two main requirements. The first is that the material has to be properly selected, just one material, and at the same time, it must be clean. And the main disadvantage is, as Aleš already said, that the molecules or macromolecules of which the plastics is made. So the properties, the unique properties of plastics are given also by the length of that molecule. And during thermomechanical processing, the chain scission occurs. So we got small macromolecules. Thus, it deteriorates the properties. So, but it's such material recycling. It's at quite high level in the case of PET bottles. We are today able to produce bottles from bottles, which is closed loop. I think the favorite way from the circular economy point of view. As in this case, is possible during the process to overcome the decrease in the molecular weight or in the length of the macromolecule. Also, high-density polyethylene is widely recycled by this process, but followed by low-density polyethylenes and polypropylenes. The second step is chemical recycling, when the macromolecules is decomposed to the monomers, to the basic units, which is possible almost in polycondensates, also in the case of PET. And it doesn't require so clean material, but still it requires one material at a certain level of cleanness. And the next methods are pyrolysis and gasification. I think you will get more information later on. But finally, if it's not possible, we can still use the energy.
Okay.
And as just because of that chain scission, it's completely different behavior from metals, for instance, since steel can be remelted many times. That's not possible with plastics.
Okay. So is that all clear to everybody here? I think so. So landfill generally a bad idea. Yeah. At least from an economical point of view, I presume also from an environmental point of view, right? I mean, these plastics can potentially leak into our environment through landfill?
Maybe it's going to sound like heresy, but I think there are way worse materials in the landfills than plastics. I think plastics, for example, organic waste or toxic waste, that's the real issue, because that rots, it produces methane emissions, and it leaks into the bottom water reservoirs. So I don't know how plastics act and react in the landfills when they are mixed with other sources of waste. It's an interesting question.
Okay, but whatever. So in that case, landfill is definitely a no-no. It looks well. The Czech government is committed now then to raising the tax on landfills, so we can expect a transition towards other ways of treating this waste. As Jiří mentions, one thing about there's different types of plastics. Some are more lended to them being recycled than others. Each recycling step, you lose some of the initial advantages of the virgin material in terms of its property, but nevertheless it can be done. Now then, when we get to the unclean, dirty, potentially toxic plastic wastes, single-use plastics coming from, let's say, hospitals, etc., then it goes, I think, to past the easy recycling possibilities, and it goes to something like incineration or even pyrolysis in your case. So maybe, Robert, could you tell us all about how pyrolysis works, what plastics are suitable for it, what do we get from it, what are the advantages, disadvantages, what needs to be done?
Right, I will try to give you a brief overview. So the way how pyrolysis works, it's simply you apply heat to a material without oxygen being present, because once you apply heat and there is oxygen, you have incineration, it burns. So we can't really have that if we want to use something more out of it than energy. And this is how pyrolysis works. You take material, you heat it up, you get rid of the oxygen, and then some let's say, changes of a chemical nature start to occur. It's similar to what happens to the plastic as it's being remelted, as Mr. Kotek has described before me. So basically, we are applying the same principle, only in an elevated temperature, so it accelerates the rate of these reactions. Therefore, we end up with some kind of product out of it. Based on what temperature we choose, we end up with either the lightest possible molecules, which are of gaseous phase, or if we step it back a little bit to temperatures of around, I don't know, ending at 600, 700 degrees, we end up with certain part of proportion of liquids. And then it's up for us what to do with those products, because they are basically chemicals. They are still chemicals, because plastics were born as crude oil, then reprocessed, and then on the industrial scale pyrolyzed, actually, because pyrolysis is one of the most common reaction that is used for producing monomers like ethylene, propylene on industrial scale. And this is something what has been done for decades now, so we are very familiar what happens when we apply fossil crude oil-based feedstock into pyrolysis. We yield ethylene, propylene, benzene, for instance.
At good conversion rates? I mean, is it efficient?
Right. They are good, or let's say, what is good conversion rate, right? They are kind of feasible, and they are somehow, we are reaching the plateau of what the nature allows us, what the thermodynamics actually allow us to produce, right? So at certain conversion rates, as good as possible, right? And then we take those monomers, we polymerize them, therefore from monomers you end up with polymers. Then you add some additives, for instance. So when you mix polymer with an additive, you get plastic. And the battery of technologies that we use in this whole process can be reapplied, for instance, to those coming out of pyrolysis of waste plastics, because pyrolysis works always the same. It's just a matter of what you feed into the pyrolysis, and then the product can be managed exactly the same way as the other chemical streams or hydrocarbon streams are being managed. So it's just a matter of, picking the right technology, setting it up.
Okay, quick question. Yeah, of course.
Well?
Yeah.
Sorry, after you. You were first.
Well, okay, my quick question is I'm imagining now this circle of, I've got an old polymer, which has been thrown away, and then I put it into your pyrolysis instrument. It disassembles that polymer chain into individual monomers. I collect it, and then I can remake a new polymer.
Exactly.
And that new polymer is as good as virgin polymer fabrication?
Yes, and that's exactly the point.
So that's an interesting method of recycling, where the end product is sort of as good as new. Which, of course, as Yuji pointed out, in other recycling techniques, of say melting of thermoplastics and regain, then you might lose some properties. But what is that? How much do we lose in that process? If I give you a kilo of plastic waste, how much new plastic can I get back?
I would say that from kilo of plastics, you can get 60–70% of something of value, either gas or gaseous or liquid phase.
Right.
You take those 60–70%, but there is always a mixture coming out of it. There is always some liquid produced, there is always some solid part produced, there is always some gaseous product produced. And coming back to what I've said, plastic itself is part polymer, part additives. And this ratio can differ greatly. In tires, for instance, it's like only 50-50, rubber and other additives. In these low-density polyethylene stretch foils, for instance, it's almost pure polyethylene, almost pure polymer. So it really depends what you feed. This affects directly your yield structure, what is going to, what kind of proportion of gas and liquid you get. And then it's just a matter of economy of scale, whether it's worth for you to deal with also the gaseous product, not only the liquid product, because oil is easy to handle, right?
Yes.
And so therefore, I would like to give you a general question, but it's not really possible. If you would have to at least specify what kind of...
At least we've got a ballpark figure of its efficiency.
Right.
Wojciech, you had a question.
Yeah, I think this sounds really interesting. And so when we think of using waste products as a feed for pyrolysis, when you look at this, this is HDPE, this is PET, and this is probably PE.
Or PVC.
Or PVC. So you can't really just mash the bottles of these three components into 1 ton and put it through pyrolysis, right?
Yes, you can.
You can?
Exactly.
Okay.
This is what I meant by the fact that the pyrolysis works always the same.
Okay, because that's what I'm interested in. Because what we have, what Aleš is dealing with is that there's so much plastics that have no value, market value, maybe technological value for recycling. They need to be destroyed, incinerated. But could we use this, we call it vignette, for pyrolysis? If not, of course, waste to energy transformation.
In general, yes, because you are still talking about hydrocarbons entering, hydrocarbons leaving. Only question is what determines whether you are going to actually do or not is what is the yield, so therefore how expensive the whole chain gets, and what is the quality in terms of other contaminants being present in those products that you need to get rid of. But in principle, we do exactly the same with fossil fuel, with crude, with oil. This is exactly the same what happens. We extract oil, it's full of, let's say, contaminants, and we have developed over decades, we as a humanity, we have developed approaches that can get rid of those contaminants and produce products that are of value. Because imagine that the
so
highest...
It's a refinement and engineering problem.
Exactly.
Okay, but contaminants... Yes, Jiří.
I just want to point out that pyrolysis is suitable for mixed plastic waste.
Yeah.
So for different types of plastics.
But where is it? Why don't we? It sounds like a magical cure, but I don't see it happening.
We're going to come to that. But before we come to that, I wanted to go quickly over to Aleš, because one thing, rather than sending it to Robert to pyrolyze, we could just send it directly to Aleš, and he could get all the energy back, or at least a lot of the energy back, right? But just by burning it outright. So tell us a bit about what goes on at Malešice, how it works, and...
Okay. No, first, let me set clear that we are not looking forward for the hills of plastic coming to our plant, because we will get a lot of problems with the heating value. The waste energy plants are suitable for heating value of about, let me say, 10 to 12 gigajoule per ton. 1 ton of plastic has about 35 to 40 gigajoule. So it will be a big problem on the grid.
Too much energy.
Yes, too much energy, and it can destroy the grid if you put too much plastic.
So there's a capacity problem. So if we...
it is a technology problem, not the capacity problem. Let me say, we have a capacity of about 400,000 metric tons per year. And we will be able to co-incinerate with the household waste, co-incinerate maybe 20,000 metric tons of pure plastic residuum per year, not more, because of the heating value of the mixture of household waste with the plastic waste, which will result in a heating value of about 10.5, 11. So then more heating value, then lower capacity, because the vessel can produce 40 tons of steam per hour. And then higher heating value, then less throughput of waste you can drive through the vessel to get the 40 ton of steam per hour. This is the limitation. So this is the reason why we don't want too much plastic. Of course, we will be able to co-incinerate some amount of plastic, but definitely much better way is what Robert does, because you have, of course, energy. It is energy recovery, of course, but you have fuel with higher value. We are producing only heat.
Yes.
And he can drive engines with it, for example.
Yes,
you know?
which are themselves inefficient.
If I see the European hierarchy of handling with waste,
priorities.
So you have diminishing of waste, blah, 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 blah. Then you have reusing of waste as material, then reusing of waste as fuel, and then landfill. And the stage of reusing of materials, of plastic as fuel has yet 2 steps. The higher step is what Robert does, and the lower step is what we does.
Yes. Okay, so let's go back to that question you had. So Robert, what's stopping you taking in huge quantities of plastic waste, putting it into your magic tube, and pyrolyzing it and getting out of it all those lovely gaseous and liquid hydrocarbon molecules?
You want an easy answer? It's money.
It's money.
It always is.
Okay, hands in pockets, chaps. Where's the...
No, it's one of the problems. And it's not true that it's not happening. For instance, a company, and that we all probably know, even though majority of the audience is not probably chemist, BASF is making this concept work in Norway. And it's not coincidence that it's happening in Norway in particular, because although they apply some of the EU, European Union regulations, they not comply to all of them. Therefore, there is a certain degree of freedom left out for companies like BASF to try or to use Norway market as their kind of test facility for these concepts. And they actually do that, and in spring this year they have signed, meaning the company who does this magical tube thing, they have signed an agreement with Norwegian Green Dot Scheme operator, so Norwegian equivalent of Ecocom here in Czech Republic, that they will process annually like up to 18,000 tons of waste plastics a year. And this is still just a pilot plant. This is still just, well, we believe we have made it work, so let's try it out. But what are the costs there? I will try to elaborate just briefly on that. Well, what comes out of pyrolysis of waste plastic can be very heterogeneous in terms of it strongly depends what you put into pyrolysis, and there is vast amount of number of plastics. I believe there are over 1 million polymers as molecules being registered within the CAS systems, so up to 1 million molecules can enter. Therefore, you can imagine how many will leave. And these molecules, these mixtures, they bring with them kind of contaminants and properties that are so dissimilar from oil. Therefore, although the refineries have been built to process oil, they still can process somehow with slight adjustments these materials.
Can you dilute it with the what?
You can either dilute in, or you can kind of create a smaller technologies only dedicated for this type of material stream. It's all possible. It's just a matter of money, because it costs something extra. And the reason why it has not been kind of rolled out industry-wide, worldwide, is simple, because at the end, you produce a product which is not competitive to the original version. And once the consumer is not willing to pay for that, or not consumer, or the system is not willing to pay that extra, for that, why would you do it? Because I would say, virgin plastic producer is not obliged to comply to any extended producer responsibility, dissimilarly to plastic packaging producers, for instance.
Yes.
But once the moment comes, and I believe it will, I believe the chemistry sector will be ready to roll out with scale of these applications. So this is one of the key, let's say, obstacles on the way. And second, just to give you an idea, my office is in refinery in Litvinov, which is the largest refinery and petrochemical complex in Central Europe. And this complex alone crunches through 6 million tons of crude oil a year. So, and from that we produce 5 million tons of fuel and million tons of petrochemicals. And if we say, okay, how about we replace 10% of our production with recycled material? We suddenly are talking about producing 100,000 tons of petrochemicals out of waste. And for that, you would have to manage 250,000 tons of plastic waste, which is a whole yellow bin system in Czech Republic. Yeah. So the appetite is there, but the plastic by nature is very decentralized to make it work. And for us, for chemical players, to make it work,
it has to be the market.
Yeah, there has to be market, but also there has to be scale. And this scale is problematic because, as I described, the 100,000 tons of recycled materials need to begin with 250,000 tons of waste plastic being put through certain process or some kind of process, be it pyrolysis, be it gasification, whatever. And this is basically every yellow bin in the Czech Republic.
Briefly, Jiří, you're also working on using microwave energy to do something similar. Is it a similar technique of pyrolysis?
No. Just as I try to explain, the basic recycling method, it's material recycling, just remelting. The second step is, or second kind is chemical recycling, when you decompose the plastic or the polymer into the monomer units.
Yes.
And the third one is feedstock recycling, either pyrolysis or gasification.
Yes.
When you get some gaseous components such as synthetic gas in the case of gasification, and some paraffins or waxes and so on, and some small hydrocarbons.
So your work is on the first
the microwaves,
part.
it's just chemical recycling.
Yeah.
And we have focused on polyurethane foams that are cross-linked. That it means it's impossible to remelt them. And we decompose the foams using microwave heating, which allows us to decrease the energy requirements. And at the same time, we use a bioreagent prepared from waste natural oils. Okay. So it's, let's say, more bio way,
yes,
or more it's nature friendly, and from obtained substances we can again synthesize the polyurethane foam.
So maybe we're coming to the end of our first hour, so in a moment I'd like to open this discussion up to the whole floor, but perhaps as a sort of a little semi-conclusion now. Wojciech, I'm going to ask you, as somebody who's got his fingers on more of a broader concept of the circular economy, what you've just been listening to now, is this filling you with confidence about how we can improve the way we're managing our resources of plastics?
Partly, yes. I mean, of course, it's great to hear that we're developing, let's say, end-of-pipe solutions to try to get better at eliminating plastic waste. But I think the discussion that we also need to have is how do we really turn the whole system upside down? And how do we close the loop? How do producers take responsibility behind business models to not focus on 30% collection, 40, 30%, but 100%? You know, how do we really set up these circular loops from a producer perspective, consumer perspective? I think we haven't touched upon that in depth, but I think that's where we need to get. And for Unipetrol, as a producer of virgin plastic, pyrolysis, I think, sounds like a great option. But I think the same could apply to companies that's making these bottles, right? They also need to have their own plan. And
Okay,
so it's a bigger picture, and we have focused on...
Okay. Well, let's get on to that. Maybe also with support of questions from the audience about whether the systems are in place, or even the ambition is in place to get 100% collection, get those feedstocks to all the different possibilities for setting it into the circle. But perhaps before you finish this first hour then, can I ask you a quick yes or no answer? Maybe we can start with Alish. Do plastics belong in a responsible future?
I think so.
Yes?
Definitely.
Yes, but different than now. This is not responsible. This is really irresponsible what we're doing. It's destroying our planet.
Okay.
Yes?
Okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank you all for being with us for the first hour. And that's a sort of a nice end to that segment.